Costco has about 3 million people that visit their stores every day worldwide. Okay. Now, if you take a cable news network show, all right, um, probably the highest rated one would have about 3 million people that watch that show on a nightly basis. Okay. Now, people pay some pretty good size amounts of money to get 30-second ads during one of those shows. But if a customer walks into a Costco, they don't spend 30 seconds in there. They spend a lot longer than 30 seconds. That experience is the commercial.
Hey everybody, this is Jeremy Tiers from Tutor Collegiate Strategies, and you're about to check out the latest episode of the Mission of Mission podcast, a show that's designed to help higher ed become better recruiters, communicators, marketers, and managers. Each week I'll introduce you to an industry leader or difference maker who will share helpful advice, tips, and strategies that will help you grow professionally and personally. Mission of Mission is part of the Enrollify podcast network. I'm excited to share my latest candid conversation, so let's get started. Hey everybody, it's Jeremy Tiers, and this is episode 22 of the Mission Admissions podcast. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation because my guest has a very deep knowledge of the customer experience space, so much so that he has become a sought-after speaker, not only on customer experience, but also business strategy and economic policy. Marbu Brown founded a company called the Customer Obsession Advantage, and he's also written a wonderful book that I recommend you pick up titled The Blueprint for Customer Obsession. Welcome to the show, Marbu.
Well, Jeremy, thanks a lot. I'm really glad to be with you today, and I'm looking forward to us having a stimulating discussion.
I think there's all kinds of things you'll be able to help listeners with, and so I would love to start here, Marbu. These terms of customer obsessed, customer centric, customer focused, they all get thrown around like they're one and the same. And I know you feel, correct me if I'm wrong, they aren't necessarily one and the same. So can you explain the differences between them and kind of in your mind what really makes a company or an organization customer obsessed?
Let me start by giving you a quick definition of customer obsession, right? Customer obsession is an extreme focus on the customer that drives companies to adopt policies, take actions, and make investments in the customer's favor, even when they cannot immediately connect the dots to their own financial benefit. And they do that because they know that it always pans out in the end when you take the position that if it's good for the customer, it's good for business. An easy way to help people understand what this means is by using a couple of examples. Let's take Amazon. Customer service associates actually have the authority to take an item off the site, take it out of sale if it's been causing bad experiences for customers. It can't be put back on the site until some troubleshooting has been done to determine how to fix that and solve it. And then once that's been resolved, it can be put back on the site. When Amazon first did this, it was done because it was the right thing to do. Now, later on, it turns out that this saves the company tons of money, 8, 9 figure range. But it was done because it was the right thing to do for the customer. It was working backwards from the customer. So that's the kind of thing that I would refer to as an extreme focus on the customer, where you're doing it because it's the right thing for the customer. You may not be able to connect all these dots to how it's going to pay off for you in monetary terms, but we know it always pans out in the end. I'll give you another example. The Ritz-Carlton gives their ladies and gentlemen, that's how they refer to their associates, their ladies and gentlemen, a budget of $2,000 per lady or gentleman, per customer, per incident to solve something that has gone wrong for the customer. That's pretty decent sized budget. And to be quite frank, if people were spending that amount of money all the time, it might cost the company tons of money. As it turns out, people never even come anywhere close to spending that amount of money. They know they have it available to them if they need to use it, but they generally never come anywhere close to spending it. But because they have this empowerment, they have done some phenomenal things for customers. They post about on social media and all that sort of thing. And if you think about all of the publicity that it gets them, they would have to spend lots of money to pay for that, right? But again, that's not the original reason why they did it. They did it because it was the right thing to do for the customer. Companies that are customer centric, they do a lot of things in the customer's favor, but typically when it comes to those things that they don't necessarily see the ROI right away, they don't pull the trigger. The customer does not break the tie, right? At that point. And so that's the distinction.
So, what do you think then, truly at the end of the day, Marbu, prevents a company from being customer obsessed?
I think that for a lot of folks, because they don't have that line of sight, straight to a return on investment for a particular decision, even though it may be in the customer's favor, they're not going to make that decision. Right. And so this is where sometimes companies may do a phenomenal job of doing things for customers, but because they can't take that next step, all right, you know, they don't get all the way into the customer obsessed realm, right? Think of Zappos. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Zappos. Okay, you are. And in their call centers, they do not give their customer service associates a time limit. They don't have like a metric that they're beholden to, an average handle time metric for how long they can spend on the phone with a customer. Their mandate is to do the right thing by the customer, use good judgment, but they don't have this average handle time limit. Again, that's another thing that in a lot of circles would be thought of as, like call center heresy, right? I mean, like, but you know what? The business does extraordinarily well. And it's typically the case that when you look at all of these businesses that have adopted these kinds of policies, the policies pay off way more than it costs the company.
Alrighty, we're gonna play a game, guys, okay? So, first and foremost, get a pen, get a paper, pull out your notes app on your phone, whatever it might be, okay? Got it? Great. All right, what keywords does your website currently rank for? Take a couple seconds, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. I gave you a few, not just a couple. What doesn't it rank for that you think it should rank for? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, what are a few keyword opportunities that you could be winning on if you just simply tweaked some of your existing website copy? Got it? Okay, how'd you do? Ooh, not so hot? Not sure what you're currently ranking for, or not sure what you could be ranking for? Well, that's okay, because our friends at DD Agency want to help you answer all of these questions. DD Agency is a higher ed specific marketing technology agency that has conducted countless SEO audits for colleges and universities across the country. In these audits, they detail where you currently rank, what you could be ranking for, exactly how copy should be tweaked on website pages, and so much more. If this sounds like something that you could benefit from, give the guys at DD Agency a ping and be sure to mention that Enrollify sent you to claim a 10% discount on any of their SEO offerings. So head on over to enrollify.org/DDA SEO. That's DDA as in DD Agency, SEO, or simply follow the link in the show notes below. That will guarantee you get a 10% discount off of your audit. All right, head on over to enrollify.org/DDA SEO, or simply Google DD Agency, find DD Agency's website, and be sure to mention that you heard about them through Enrollify when you request your audit. All right, folks, back to the show.
So then let's take a step back, because you've used this phrase already a couple of times, do the right thing. How do you help figure out what this right thing is Is it data and research? Is there other things that companies need to do if they truly want to learn what that right thing is?
Well, let me start by saying the right thing is first principles. I use this expression: if it's good for customers, it's good for the business. So if you take a company like Amazon, you'd hear Jeff Bezos say, look, there's a lot of ways you could center a business. You can center a business around a product. You can center a business around competition, right? There's a lot of ways you can center the business. From the beginning, his perspective was we're going to center the business around the customer, and the customer is going to break the ties, right? We're going to work backwards from the customer, because if we're always working backwards from the customer, we're always going to wind up in the right place, right? So that's how these businesses have come to the right thing. If you work backwards from the customer and you work backwards to what they need, you're going to come to the right place. And I think for some folks it feels rather scary to to think about it that way when you can't always necessarily connect the dots. But all I can tell you is that the companies that have bet this way have never bet wrong. And so you just have a growing body of examples of companies that bet this way, and as they do, it always pans out.
I have to believe, though, and I'm just trying to be empathetic to both sides. If I'm a
Hmm.
leader listening to this in my org and I'm going, Marbu, we want to be more customer obsessed as either an industry, as an organization, as a company, as a college or a university, but I also report to a board or I have to show, at what point do you just get comfortable enough to say, you just have to trust me that if we do this, this is going to work out, versus the fear overtakes it to where even though they know all the things you're saying make sense and are true, that fear is just something they can't get past.
There are a number of different ways that people can put some proof points on the table, if you will, that help people to overcome some of these. And I'm going to use another very specific example. Um, let's take Costco. All right, Costco has about 3 million people that visit their stores every day worldwide. Okay, now if you take a cable news network show, probably the highest rated one would have about 3 million people that watch that show on a nightly basis. Okay. Now, people pay some pretty good size amounts of money to get 30-second ads during one of those shows. But if a customer walks into a Costco, they don't spend 30 seconds in there. They spend a lot longer than 30 seconds. That experience is the commercial. Okay. If a customer walks away from that experience with a phenomenal experience, okay, what they can do in terms of evangelizing that business is like more than, so if you get 3 million, folks visiting that. Now, every business does not have the benefit of 3 million people walking through there on a day-to-day basis. But bottom line is, if you adopt the perspective that every experience with the customer is like a commercial, and you start translating that into what those dollars are worth on a day-to-day basis, you can begin to see that if you take this perspective of delivering memorable, outstanding experiences for your customers, it's going to pay off in dollar terms, right? So, look, that's one of the ways that you can, overcome some of the fear and inertia, right? Because again, I can give you plenty of examples of how these companies that have taken this type of a position. I can show you how it's translated into social media mentions and those kinds of things that are far beyond anything that they've spent.
So I've also heard you say that organizations and brands who typically are customer obsessed are also employee obsessed. Can you expand on that for everybody listening?
Part of this whole thing with employee obsession even starts at the front end in terms of who do you bring in the door, right? Who do you bring in the door and what are they bringing to the table for the customer? Okay? That's one aspect of it. But then what kind of environment do you create for them to be able to execute and give a great experience for that clientele, right? Because if you do not create a positive environment for those folks, then it becomes more difficult for them to create a positive environment for your students. I can tell you that the companies that are great customer obsessed businesses, their employees have mechanisms in place where they can talk back to the management team in a way that the management team can listen and respond, because they're on the front line. They're engaging with the customer. They're seeing what works. They're seeing what doesn't work, right? That's part of employee obsession. Look, employees have hopes, dreams, and aspirations. All right. When you're in a business, if that business feels like it can help you accomplish your hopes, your dreams, and your aspirations, it makes you feel like a part of that business and you want to stick around. Okay. And the same must be true in colleges and universities, that, the folks who are the employees feel like they can accomplish their hopes and their dreams and their aspirations in that environment. People want to feel like they're part of a mission, not like they're just a cog in a wheel churning out something on an assembly line, right? And so that's part of what it takes to be employee obsessed.
What are some things that you've seen companies do to really empower, for example, their employees to, for example, you said earlier, share critical feedback? Like, walk us through the structure, for example, of how that might look.
I have seen a scenario where we had an automated mechanism in place where we could have employees send feedback even on a daily basis, and we could, all of that is in a database where you can query that database. You can see what types of feedback people are sending. You can see if there's patterns in that feedback. You can see if there's brewing threats in that feedback. When I say brewing threats, like, things that require urgent attention that need to be dealt with right away. So I've seen that type of system in place where, and I'm saying it very carefully because I may not necessarily want to give away anything that's proprietary, but I've seen that type of mechanism in place where and people are checking it on a regular basis to see what kind of feedback is coming through. And during a period like the pandemic, when we're at the height of the pandemic, something like this was invaluable because you'd be able to see what kinds of shifts you needed to make, even almost on a daily basis. Now, for some of these, I would say that, the normal summarization period would be maybe monthly, maybe weekly. But when you're in a crisis period like we had during the pandemic, you can go to a scenario where you're summarizing stuff on a daily basis, finding those brewing threats and being able to turn those around. And let me take, for example, something like in Amazon. Look, in Amazon, there's a mechanism that they refer to as the PRFAQ. Okay, PR is in a press release, FAQ is in frequently asked questions. Okay, sometimes when somebody wants to advance an idea, they write it in the form of what's called a PRFAQ. They write it as if it's already completed, it's something to be announced. The FAQ part is to force people to think about some of the questions that they have to answer for this to actually become a reality. And then there's, a group of people who, in your management team or something, who would review it and they'll figure out if it's something worth funding, or they might ask you some critical questions. And usually, before something becomes a reality, it might take maybe about 3 or 4 different iterations because people kick the tires on this. Some of the things you didn't think about when you were putting your FAQs together, you go and tweak it, right? And, back when I was at Amazon, one of the things that was launched was something called Prime Now. Amazon Prime is famous for its 2-day delivery. Prime Now was instituted in certain places where it was basically 2-hour delivery. So you can think of Prime Now as being one of those things that started with a PR FAQ, right? And then people had to think through all of the pieces that would have to come together for it to be a reality. So it's not necessarily something that you could implement in every market, but it makes sense to implement in places like New York and Chicago and LA and places like that, right? You might not necessarily use the same fulfillment network that you used for all your other stuff, but you might have a special fulfillment network that you use for Prime Now items. It may be that you don't have your whole catalog available through Prime Now, but you have some things available through Prime Now, right? So that's another mechanism of listening to your employees. And when you listen to your employees that way, and they can see that the things that they bring forward actually turn into real things, real world implementations that influence the lives of customers, students, whoever they might be, then, that of course encourages people to come forward with their ideas and literally turns the place into an innovation machine, right? And so, those are a couple of different ways that these types of mechanisms can come to life and help an organization listen to its people, and when people feel like their feedback is valued.
Where should a lot of companies or orgs be spending their time then to learn more about the customer experience and what may need to be changed, completely blown up, just tweaked, things like that?
Well, I'm gonna go out on a limb here, and I'm not going very far out on this limb by saying a lot of companies don't need to do more listening. The surveys that they have in place, the different mechanisms that they have in place, give them plenty of information. The question is, are they acting on the information?
But why is that such a struggle then, Marbu, to get so many of these companies and orgs to act on the information that they get from their customer?
Well, acting on the information comes down to something that we talked about a little bit earlier, and that's that whole notion of whether people can always connect the dots to the financial benefit. Folks see that they can kind of plot along without making certain types of changes. And so the customer feedback might say, you know what, you need to modernize your IVR. And the company might say, well, you know what, when I do the cost analysis, this IVR is working well enough. I don't need to change it, right? Now, the customers might have told them, 10 times that they need to hundreds of times maybe, that they need to change the IVR, and they're not doing it. Now, here's the interesting thing that I find with a lot of companies. If a competitor does it, and that competitor begins to have amazing results, all of a sudden, like all that financial analysis they were doing, it's out the window, right? It's like, well, the competitor's doing it, let's go do it. Now, when you do that, are you centering the company around the customer, or are you centering the company around the competition? And that's what I think that you have in a lot of cases. There are things that companies know that they should do, but they're afraid to make the investment, or they keep prioritizing other investments ahead of that investment until there's a crisis. And then when there's a crisis, it goes out the window. If I had to say one more thing about listening, instead of it being much more about better surveys and those kinds of things, it would be better usage of the free form data that comes into the company or into the organization on a daily basis, right? People are, customer service associates are talking to customers. If you have the transcripts of those calls and you can parse them, there's a lot of information coming into the business that way. You might have a complaint department. Complaints are coming in. They're in free form. A lot of times people look at complaints as one-off pieces of information, right? But there may be patterns in that information that are super valuable for people to be able to address, right? And so if they're able to parse that information, um, that would be great. There's emails, there's chats, there's all this free form information coming into the organization, and I can tell you it's a gold mine. Now, it has eluded companies for a lot of years to be able to parse this information. But I can tell you, this is one place that AI is going to help us a tremendous amount. And so, getting ahead of that game and utilizing AI to really parse that information, that would be a place that I would say that companies can spend a little bit more time. So, make sure you make the most of the information you already have. Don't keep sitting on the decisions, right? B, make the most of your free form data that's coming into the business on a daily basis in abundance. You'll have the information you need to understand what to do for your customers, and maybe more than you ever thought that you had.
How else do you think AI, Marbu, will change the customer service industry?
There's a lot of things that have eluded companies for a while, like chatbots, for example. Okay. A lot of people don't want to deal with a chatbot because sometimes you get into an endless loop. But chatbots are going to become infinitely smarter, and your conversation with a chatbot may be almost indistinguishable from your conversation with a live human being, right? And the thing about an AI powered chatbot is it may it may be set up in a way where it knows this is as far as I can go. I need to transfer you over to a live agent. Okay. And I can tell you that the Amazon chatbot right now, and it was like this, even before I left there in 2017. It it knows at a certain point to transfer you to a live agent, and the live agent can do certain things and transfer you to the chatbot, and it's totally seamless. And this is one of the places that AI is going to make tremendous strides. Another place it's going to make strides is in virtual assistants that are on mobile apps, helping people to navigate mobile apps. And, a lot of mobile apps don't need help navigating, but I can tell you for certain that in the banking industry, mobile apps could use some navigating. And I would imagine that, if a college has, a mobile app that helps people to go through the admissions process or go through the onboarding process, or any of those kinds of things, having a virtual assistant that can, almost like a co-pilot that can help the student or the parents or, navigate through those kinds of things, applying for financial aid or any of those kinds of things. I mean, like, these are a little bit more complex tasks that, might be embedded in mobile apps and that can become infinitely more accessible, you know, with AI. And, it's like, I mean, if you've ever been in an app where you're searching around for how to do something, this is one of those kinds of things where you can just talk to the app and it can take you there, right?
I'd love to just ask you one more question about your time working for Amazon. You've also worked for other big companies like JP Morgan Chase, very customer driven. Just what's something that you weren't expecting about working at one or both of those companies, Marbu, that surprised you most?
Well, it's funny because if I start with working with Amazon, one thing that caught my attention was how principles driven the company was. Okay. Um, when people interview for Amazon, Amazon sends them their leadership principles, before the interview. And I remember, during my interview, it just hit me that, oh, this person's interviewing me about customer obsession, and that person's interviewing me about, like dive deep, and this person's interviewing me about hire and develop the best. And I mean, these are Amazon leadership principles, right? But let me tell you something. In that company, people know the leadership principles, not because anybody memorizes them, but because everybody uses them every day. It's part of how you run the business. When I was living in the Seattle area, we used to have these picnics, and folks from Boeing and Amazon and Microsoft and all would come together. And I was at the picnic one time, and one guy asked me, so, you know, almost something like, what makes Amazon special? And I said, well, it's principles driven company. Said, you pick any old Amazon employee, and they can tell you the leadership principles because they live them every day. So as soon as I say this, he says, wait a minute. So he pulls this guy over. He says, you just told me you work for Amazon. You tell me the leadership principles. So the guy starts telling him, Amazon leadership principles. So he said, okay, so how long have you worked there anyway? And he said, 6 weeks. Okay. So that was one thing. Look, when I got to Chase, one of the things that I found was an extraordinarily cohesive management team. And this is not throwing shade on anybody else, right? People on the same page, focused on the customer, extraordinarily cohesive. Um, it was just great.
So, what are some easy things as we wrap up, Marbu? You think if you were advising, if an org or a company brought you in and said, Marbu, we have all this data. Okay, you're telling us we need to look at it differently. What are some other things that a lot of businesses and orgs can do that really aren't heavy lifts that will get them in the right direction of being more customer obsessed?
Well, I think it's a good idea to do a policy review. And I have two questions that I would ask about policies. Okay. The first question I would ask is, do you have any policies that are so customer friendly, so clientele friendly, so student friendly? It would make your the students, your competitors, and even your employees do a double take and say, hey, like, um, who does that? Okay. That's on one side of the spectrum. You can see people at Costco taking things back that I was speaking to someone else, and he said this family sold their house. They were moving. They found some pizzas, in the freezer somewhere that they had bought from Costco, and they took it back, and Costco gave them their money back. Right? I mean, this is the kind of policy that's so customer friendly that it will make people do a double take, and they would say, like, who does that? Well, there's another kind of policy, right? So that's at one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is, do you have policies that are, like, obviously objectionable? Okay. I'll give you an example of one that happened to me where I had a rental car. I had planned to put gas in it before I went, before I turned it in. I figured I'd do it near the airport, but when we got in the airport area, I couldn't find any place to do it. So I go and I turn in the car, and the guy who's checking the car in, he says, "Mr. Brown, did you put gas in this car?" And I said, "No." He says, these guys charge like $9.99 a gallon, you know, and the price of gas was like under $2 or something, right? Um, but if you just think about how he made that statement, he didn't say we charge $9.99 a gallon. The policy was objectionable enough to him that he felt like he had to separate himself from it. You know what? Companies do have these policies, institutions, organizations, they have them. Sometimes they have them because they think it's necessary to protect their bottom line, right? But I mean, if I'm a preferred customer with this company and I always return my cars full, and I have this one scenario, for example, where I didn't return my car full, does it make sense for them to charge me $9.99 a gallon? Or might they say, you know, we're going to waive this time? Because the moment they do that, what happens? Do I start thinking, well, maybe next time I'll look for a company that doesn't do this to me, right? So, a policy review. Start with asking yourself those kinds of questions about your policies. Do I have any policies that are so customer friendly it will make people do a double take? Or do I have policies that are obviously objectionable? Because, you need some of one and you don't need any of the other.
I appreciate you being willing to share so many applicable examples today. The last thing we do, Marbu, is two things. I ask every guest a signature question. So I'd like to ask you, when you look at your career trajectory, who has been a really influential resource for you?
One of my bosses, a gentleman named Mike Farabelli. Mike and I worked together in actually multiple different organizations, and I would say that he has been a great mentor, very influential in helping me to get to the extent that I have gotten to.
Last thing we do, Marbu, is something I call fun rapid fire. So I'm just going to give you a handful of things and I just want some quick instant answers from you, okay?
Okay.
New food that you've tried at some point in the past few months.
Well, look, my wife made this phenomenal shrimp fried rice that she got off of Pinterest, and and that's not even months. I tried that like 2 or 3 days ago, so it was very good.
Favorite thing to do there in New York City where you're located?
Yeah, I like to go walk on the boardwalks. I'm not that far from them, so we've got, some of them, or just on the beach, some of them that we go to all the time. But hey, I sometimes talk about the Jersey Shore Boardwalk Tour. So there you
I,
go.
I have been to the Jersey Shore before. Very, very nice. Giants or Jets, Marbu?
Giants all the way.
Staying on football, who will have more wins this year, Ohio State football or Michigan football?
The Ohio State University football team is going to have more wins. And we're going to beat Michigan this year.
Last one, what's the biggest guilty pleasure that you're willing to admit, Marbu, that you have?
I just love singing my music when I'm working out. And I have a hard time not singing my music when I'm in the gym working out, even if other people are around me. So, yeah. It is what it is.
I appreciate you being so open and honest, just with so much of what we talked about today. If people do want to follow up with you, Marbu, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Look, I'd love people to come and check me out on LinkedIn, and they can follow me on LinkedIn, and they can see all the different stuff that I'm, writing about and all that sort of stuff, and on LinkedIn. So that's one way. I also encourage people to come to customerobsession.net. That's my company website for the Customer Obsession Advantage. There's more stuff there than they'll even find on LinkedIn. My radio appearances, other stuff from news and all that sort of stuff, company, services and all those kinds of things. And then, hey, I would encourage people to check out Blueprint for Customer Obsession on Amazon. Get the book, read it. There's a ton of takeaways that people can use immediately. And with those three things, I think, they'll be able to connect with me well.
I am looking forward to picking it up. It's on my to-do list. I just, again, appreciate you being willing to share with the audience today and want to wish you a good rest of the week, Marbu.
And you also.
Hey, all, Zach here from Enrollify. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Mission Admissions with Jaime Tears. If you like this episode, do us a huge favor and hit that follow and subscribe button below. Furthermore, if you've got just 2 minutes to spare, we would greatly appreciate you leaving a rating and a review of this show on Apple Podcasts. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, admissions, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks that are all designed to empower you to become a better higher ed professional. But Enrollify is far more than just a podcast network. Enrollify is where higher ed comes to learn new marketing skills, discover new products and services, and find their next job. We're a growing, learning community of 4,000 members, and we'd love to welcome you into the fold. You can access our free blog articles, newsletters, e-courses, and more, or purchase our master course on how to market a university with Terry Flannery at Enrollify.org. We look forward to meeting you soon and welcoming you into the community. Again, you can subscribe for free at Enrollify.org.